Today on Reparations in Action.
White people are never going to do this. We sit on the pedestal of the oppression of African people, even as women.
You're listening to Reparations in Action.
Reparations now!
Uhuru. You're listening to the White Lies Shattered podcast and FM radio show. My name is Jamie Simpson, and I am the host of White Lies Shattered, which broadcasts weekly on Black Power 96.3 FM in St. Petersburg, Florida. This week, we're talking about the recent U.S. Supreme Court overturning of Roe v. Wade, a ruling by the Supreme Court in 1973 granting the right to legal abortion to all women in the United States. White Lies Shattered, which is also known as Reparations in Action, is a program of white solidarity with Black power. Currently, we are in a podcast series exposing the insidious lies we learn as white or European people about the nature and origin of America and the current social system. We believe reparations to African people is the key question of our times and is one that demands action on the part of European or white people. We want to begin by saluting Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party for leading the African Revolution for over 50 years and for developing the theory of African Internationalism, the theory and worldview of the African working class that guides the African Revolution and which we credit for all of the understandings and analysis that we provide on this podcast. As always, we'd like to salute Black Power 96, where this show is aired and recorded for our podcast weekly. Black Power 96 is not just explaining the world, but changing it. You can get the app for Black Power 96 on Google Play or the Apple App Store and listen wherever you are located. So I'd like to welcome back on regular guest and chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, Penny Hess. Uhuru, and welcome back, Penny.
Uhuru, Jamie, it's so good to be here today and to hear your voice. And welcome to everybody who's listening. And, before we start, I do want to join in saluting Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the African People's Socialist Party, and Black Power 96 FM in St. Petersburg, Florida, and just the whole struggle of African people to be free and liberated. And that we, as white people, under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, we have the honor of seeing the world as experienced by colonized African people. And that's part of what we want to share today. And I think that there's an understanding that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has really fought for and just put out and explained in the world, called colonialism as the mode of production of this society. And when we look at the abortion issue, we're looking at a perfect example of that. So, yes, as you said, on Friday, July 24th, 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned its ruling of Roe v. Wade, the decision which granted the right of an abortion to all women in the U.S., and that was enacted in 1973, so almost 50 years that was on the book. And even though there was a leak, there is, quite a somewhat of a reaction in this country to a right that this colonial system has given, but then it can take it away whenever it wants. So I want to start by looking at the statement put out by the African National Women's Organization that is led by President Yejide Orinmila, really an amazing speaker and leader of the struggle for African women in the context of the entire African Revolution. And Anwo, the African National Women's Organization, put out a powerful, very succinct statement the same day that the Roe v. Wade was rescinded, and addressed the impact of this decision on African women. Anwo is an organization of the African People's Socialist Party led by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. So, Jamie, do you want to read that?
Yes, absolutely. So here is this statement from the African National Women's Organization and President Yejide Oronmila. Today, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, which made abortion a constitutional right. Now the legality of abortion will be decided in each U.S. state. This comes as no surprise since the decision leaked in May. Since then, many women have taken to the streets to demonstrate their opposition to this impending reversal, while others began building legal opposition to abortion barriers in their states. Anwo recognizes that this decision will undoubtedly have a huge impact on African and other colonized women. We also understand that this is just one of the many forms of attacks on our ability to produce and reproduce life for ourselves. The fight to ensure our ability to truly make decisions about our bodies and right to reproduce cannot be fully won under colonial capitalism. For centuries, this system of oppression and exploitation has robbed us of our motherhood and our humanity through the violence of slavery, colonialism, apartheid, Jim Crow, and every other iteration of colonial assault we can name. In 2022, we are still fighting against the kidnapping and transfer of our children. Mothers are losing their rights while the colonial state decides the fate of our children. This happens to hundreds of African mothers every day. Enough is enough. The time is long overdue to mount a formidable anti-colonial response to the ongoing attacks on the rights of women. For African women who have long been subjected to the worst forms of colonially imposed violence, there is no other time than now to show your support for Anwo and join the revolutionary efforts to build the capacity of African women ready to fight back. We will not let anyone speak for us. We will not let anyone represent us. Anwo are African women fighting back against the terror of white power, the colonial terror that has been unleashed upon us. And again, that was the statement by the African National Women's Organization and President Yejide Oronmila of the African People's Socialist Party.
Uhuru, that is such a powerful statement. And I mean, wow, it just really gets to the point. And the question showing that for African women as colonized inside the borders of the US and around the world, it is a completely different experience around the question of reproduction and control over one's lives. And I really, than it is for white women. Just wanted to make that point. And that in speaking to white women, it's really important that we be able to show other white women this difference in experience, the difference in reality, the coming to what the chairman calls the colonial mode of production. So, really, really, really appreciate that statement and have unity with it. I really, just love the call to action where Yejide or Anwo is saying, we will not let anyone speak for us. We will not let anyone represent us, meaning African people will decide their future, their fate. These decisions have to be made within the context of power in the hands of the African population that is colonized inside the U.S. And it's not about begging the Supreme Court to give them something. It's about a fight for liberation, national liberation, and self-government and the control over their resources and lives. And that's the context that reparations is in. But I wanted to say, Jamie, that back in the early 70s, when the issue of abortion was really out there, and there was a movement, the white feminist movement in particular, that was really pushing forward abortion in this country, the right to abortion in this country, it was certainly seen then as a white women's issue. And, and I say that even with the understanding that President Yejide also addresses that due to colonialism inside the U.S., that African working class women are a large percent of the women, all women who have abortions in the U.S. And for example, in 2019, there were over 900,000 recorded legal abortions, and that really, is does not include states that don't even keep records, like California. So the actual numbers are much higher. But of those recorded, 38% of those recorded were African women, and 28% were Spanish-speaking women and the category other. Mostly impoverished women. White women were only 33% of those who had a legal recorded abortion. And of course, there's many other alternatives there, but this is legal recorded abortion. So African, Mexican, and colonized working class women are the hardest hit by this ruling, especially here in the Midwest where I am and in the southern states that had these trigger alerts that immediately repudiated and took abortion off the books on the state level, because with the repeal of Roe v. Wade, then the decision goes to the states. So it is still going to be legal in California, New York, and several other states, places, and just the fact that white women will then much more easily be able to go to a state where abortion is legal, and be able to to have that taken care of. Whereas that is not something that is available to probably the majority of African working class women in this country. So yes, the impact of the repeal of Roe v. Wade is very serious on African and other colonized women inside this country.
Right. Yeah. This is really serious, and like anything else, the question is colonialism at the heart of this. And I've heard that, and I don't have statistics on this. Maybe we can get these. That I forget what the actual number is, but it's in the thousands. The number of women that already under legal abortion were dying, attempting abortions on their own. Mm-hmm. And so we know that this is going to mean women will die. Women, especially impoverished women and the oppressed and colonized African women and the whole African population, this disproportionately affects them. It disproportionately mm-hmm. affects indigenous women. But I know there's another side to this too, this colonial question with respect to family planning and the legacy of that in mm-hmm. this country. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the key question. And actually, at an event the other night with President Yejide of Anwo on the event, speaking on Zoom, she was just making the point that for African women, this is just one more attack in every possible kind of assault that African women and African people as a whole come under in this country every single day. So I just wanted to say that historically, African women have faced many, many different forms of colonial forced sterilization. And this has been a huge issue. And it includes, forced sterilization through different kinds of hormones and drugs given to African women, often, generally speaking, when they had no idea that was happening, including hysterectomies while they're, under anesthesia, or other kinds of things that have been forced on African women. They've been forced into sterilization, and yet also when they do have able to deliver their babies, that their babies are taken away and their children are taken away by CPS, Child Protective Services, quote unquote, in the foster care system. And in general, there is a much greater inaccessibility to prenatal care. There's higher infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates for African women compared to white women, and that's still true today. African infants in the U.S. are 2.3 to 3 times more likely to die, especially in their first year of life, than white infants, and African women in the U.S. are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth than white women. And it's really it's really deeper than that, though, because there's an article by Mary Ziegler from Harvard University that stated in the 1960s there was an alliance between the population control movement and the abortion rights movement in the United States. And we have to, really look at that. And this is a quote from her article. She's saying, together, population control and abortion rights advocates voiced the benefits of legalized abortion, such as smaller welfare costs, fewer illegitimate births, and slower population growth. At the same time, the use of these arguments put them at odds with the civil rights leaders and Black Power activists who were concerned that abortion would be used to eliminate African people and other colonized people. And it says that H. Rap Brown denounced abortion as, quote, Black genocide. And I think that was a prevailing question, that African people as colonized face genocide in this country.
Yeah, and of course you have Margaret Sanger, right, and Planned Parenthood, which has a legacy of the planned genocide of African people. Can you address that?
Well, yes. According to an article by Jeffrey Kent Peterson of MIT University, he said that the modern-day abortion rights movement began as the American Birth Control League in 1921. Among its founding board members were Margaret Sanger, Lothrop Stoddard, and C.C. Little. The latter two people were known for their racist colonialist views, but Margaret Sanger continually shows up in the company of other anti-African colonizers. In fact, Sanger was the guest speaker at a Ku Klux Klan rally in Silver Lake, New Jersey in 1926. Not only did she not disassociate herself from these views, her own writings leave little doubt as to her sympathies. She was implementing a plan called the, quote, Negro Project that was designed to sterilize African people and reduce the number of African children being born, especially in the South. So, this is history, that it's two realities. It's something that white women can experience the legal right to abortion as often, a form of birth control, as opposed to colonized women who have no control over their lives. And it's profound sense and history of the culture of African people that the entire community helps to raise children. But to have the isolation and poverty and powerlessness imposed on African people and African women through this colonial mode of production and system that we live in, it forces African women to make these choices that are not necessarily the historic choices of the African community. And I also want to say that colonial terror was used for centuries against African enslaved women, and in the so-called Reconstruction period and in the brutal period subsequent to the Civil War in the United States. And the colonial terror included white mobs who, quote, lynched and tortured African women and cut out babies, infants, fetuses from their wombs as part of the terror that's called lynching. Enslaved African women were also forced into breeding pens to, quote, breed and produce babies to be sold as commodities on the market for profit for the colonial slave masters, including Thomas Jefferson and others. And if you want to read more about that, you can read a book called The American Slave Coast, and it's the history of U.S. breeding of African people in this country. Just a hideous a hideous example of the colonial violence towards African people as a whole, but which in particular targeted African women and the control of African babies. So you have colonialism means that in one case, an African woman might be forced to have an abortion because of the conditions of poverty and isolation and lack of medical care that she would find herself in. But on the other hand, that colonialism has done everything possible throughout its history to force African women to produce babies for profit for white people. So, this is the point that's being made by the African National Women's Organization, that African people as a whole have a right to make these decisions themselves. And I just want to add, Jamie, that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has said and pointed out very brilliantly that the motive force of any society is to produce and reproduce real life for themselves, for the people, to continue the nation, the people, to feed the people, to house the people, and to continue this society and civilization that we're talking about. But African women and African people have produced and reproduced real life for white people for the last 600 years. So, yeah, African women and people are fighting to reproduce life for themselves, not to get rid of children. And this is, again, a perfect example of what Chairman Omali Yeshitela calls the colonial mode of production.
Right. So, and this is a term that we use a lot on this program, the colonial mode of production, which, am I right? This is how everything is produced for a society?
That's right. Everything is produced through colonialism. There's no wealth, there's no social wealth, there's no brilliant job that we've gotten or education or house or anything else that doesn't come about based on the reality that the land that is called the United States was stolen from the indigenous people and soaked in their blood, and just profound genocide, and the conditions that indigenous people and indigenous women are forced to live in today is still part of that genocidal colonial system that is there. We wouldn't have the opportunities and the social wealth that most white people do have access to one way or another without the fact that African people were kidnapped and trafficked to the Americas, to the Western Hemisphere, including the United States, and forced to labor, and that, for free for hundreds of years, and that white men and women had the power of life and death over African women. So when we talk about feminism and President Yejide's analysis and statement that there's no such thing as women in general, I have to totally unite with that. I can't put onto African women the experience that I might have sitting on the backs of African women. It's a completely different situation. And that's how we have to understand this issue.
Yeah. So can you speak more to this question of white feminism and the whole concept of pro-choice? Because I know there are a lot of people out there that are really concerned about the consequences of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and understandably. So could you just speak to that question, what the stance of the African People's Socialist Party is toward white feminism and this whole question of pro-choice?
Yeah, white feminism has been the ability of colonizer white women sitting on, living at the expense of African and indigenous people to fight for rights for ourselves that would put us on a better footing and equality with white men within the colonial structure. That's really what it's been about, to get rights for white women to be able to function in colonialism, to become high up in the U.S. colonial ruling class, or to be in the police or the Marines or the military, or the U.S. part of the enforcers, the state, to be part of that, to be able to get equal pay with white men. It's never been about addressing and standing in solidarity with the conditions, the genocidal conditions of African and indigenous people and women, and fighting for reparations to African people, which is truly how the world is going to transform. And, I want to say that for the African Revolution, as we saw some reference to it in the 1960s and 70s, the position against abortion is not a moral one, but it is, again, the question that African people have the right to have power, to govern themselves. That's why the African People's Socialist Party says the struggle is not against racism. It's against colonialism. It's not against the ideas in white people's heads. It's against this superstructure that exists in this country that has as its foundation the colonial assault on African people and oppressed people around the world, which continues today, the tentacles of U.S. imperialism sinking deep into the bodies of African people. And so, African women aren't out there fighting against this repeal of Roe v. Wade in the same way that white women are. And again, that we cannot, be begging a state that's built on suffering and rape and plunder and murder and assault that this colonial capitalist system and state is based on. We can't be fighting for it to say, oh, please give us a right again. If we are serious about changing the world, then we have to be under the leadership of the African Revolution and really be fighting for reparations, the return of resources to African people, which is part of what negates the control by the colonial economy and state over African people. That when we're talking about reparations, we're talking about African people having control over their lives and building their own economy and therefore their own institutions that benefit African people.
Wow. And, I think one of the things to point out too, in light of what's happened is the ways in which the African People's Socialist Party keeps providing solutions on the ground for everything that African people are going through. I mean, this is why the African Women's Center is being built by the Black Power Blueprint, and Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela has called this the Uhuru wa Kulia, the freedom to nurture.
That is so beautiful. And, and I think that what the African People's Socialist Party is working for and the movement of the African working class, which is increasingly growing and building, not only in the U.S., but in Africa and Europe and Caribbean, is to build a world where abortion may not be necessary, because there would be power over the lives, because the needs of a community are met. And that is a stand and something that, the Haiti Revolution, which we've talked about on this show, which was so brilliant and amazing in 1804, when Haiti they defeated France and they declared independence for Haiti under the leadership of Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the African working class. One of the first things they put in their constitution was an end to what was known at that time as an illegitimate child. They have in their constitution, there is no such thing as an illegitimate child. So this is the concept of, just the humanity and beauty of a society under the leadership of the values of the African Revolution, which is the values of people and humans, not profit and violence, murder, slaughter, and oppression. And so if we want to see a whole world that is a world that all humans can live in, it's got to be under the leadership of the African working class. White people are never going to do this. We sit on the pedestal of the oppression of African people, even as women. So even though there is some oppression that white people might experience, it's still oppression on the pedestal. And it's Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the profound leadership Deputy Chair Omisene Yeshitela who have taught us this, who show it in the reality of this Black Power Blueprint, which is a beautiful, beautiful vision. Well, I would say real program that is growing, that has so many facets. It's got a basketball court and a women's center and so much more, that is putting on the ground this vision of a liberated Africa that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has so eloquently written about. Uhuru.
And yeah, I really unite with everything you just laid out, Chairwoman Penny. I think it's so important to remember what this whole social system is, this colonial mode of production, which was founded in forcing African women and their bodies, their wombs, mm-hmm. to become an engine of production for commodities, for profit, right. for white people, not for themselves. That mm-hmm. children, that African women's bodies would be this engine of production. Just yes. how absolutely obscene that is. Yes. And when you look at things like the legacy of African women in desperation of the horrors of colonial slavery, and indigenous women too, turning by the thousands sometimes to killing their children, to spare them the horror of living through slavery under colonialism. I mean, that is the ultimate theft of reproductive rights, right? Theft of any future for your children. And that is still the mode of production that we live under today. It is the exact same colonialism. So we can't expect this colonial system to offer reproductive justice or reproductive self-determination to African people or anyone else. And if people want to see the kind of future that the African People's Socialist Party is fighting for, and check out the Uhuru wa Kulia, you can go to blackpowerblueprint.org. That's blackpowerblueprint.org.
So, yeah, I just... we would love to hear from all of you and anybody listening. And we're going to be setting up a way that you can contact and we can talk back and forth if you have any questions, issues. We're going to start that with our next show.
Yeah, so. Definitely. And in the meantime, if you can go wherever you're listening to this podcast, there should be a comment section. You can comment there and we'll get it more centralized in the coming episodes. But please tell us what you think about the overturning of Roe V Wade and the legacy of colonialism and African women and reproduction in this country. And I really want to thank you, Chairwoman Penny Hess, for joining us today. I also want to salute a new team member of White Lies Shattered podcast, or Reparations in Action, and that's Deidre Martin, for all the work that she did in helping with research for this script.
Great research, yes.
So we're going to leave it there for today. Penny, thank you again. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. This has been White Lies Shattered. We'll see you next time.
You're listening to Reparations in Action.
Reparations now!
This has been an episode of Reparations in Action, the White Lies Shattered series, a biased podcast of white solidarity with Black power. My name is Jamie Simpson. This episode was engineered by Marcel Marius, who also composed our theme music. The show is researched and produced by Penny Hess, Jesse Neville, and Lisa Watson from the Black Power 96.3 FM studio in St. Petersburg, Florida. A shout out to Akile Anayi and DJ Eddie Maltzby, as well as the entire Reparations in Action team, Sandra Forrest, Johan Bedingfield, Amanda Carlozzi, Kyle Weiss, Marissa Ricchetti, Ali Aiello, Alana Woods, Declan Keller, Hallie Murray, and Sarah Rittersbach. If you liked what you heard today, you can go to Apple Podcasts and rate this podcast. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, please email them to us at ria@blackpower96.org. Special thanks to the African People's Socialist Party's chairman Omali Yeshitela, without whose leadership and theory of African internationalism, none of the understandings presented on Reparations in Action would be possible. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.